Hey there, viewers. The courtroom was already tense, but what happened next left everyone frozen. Security cam footage was played, showing Diddy in a private holding room, threatening witnesses before they could take the stand. No one said a word when it ended, because the damage was already done. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Walls in Holding Room 3B. I ain't never planned to talk about it. Not once. Not to a soul, not even when the nightmares started. The ones where the hallway goes too quiet, or the door to room 3B just opens by itself, and there ain't no one there but something's watching. But I figure if you've come this far to find me, asking questions no one else is supposed to remember, then maybe it's time I tell it the way it really happened. Not in the courtroom, no. That place was just where they read what was already written. The real part, the rotten root of it all, that started down below. In the basement, holding room 3B. I used to be a court security officer, retired now, living off-grid, don't ask where. I've changed names 3 times since the trial wrapped. Not 'cause I did anything wrong, but 'cause I saw something I shouldn't have. And the ones who did the real wrong, they never want witnesses with long memories sticking around too long. Anyway, the courthouse basement ain't nothing like the rest of the building. Up there it's got windows and polished floors and long desks where the lawyers do their performing. But down below, it's just concrete and rust. The walls sweat in summer and breathe in the winter. The pipes bang like someone's trapped in them. You'd never guess the fate of people's lives pass through down there. Every defendant, every nervous witness, every person brought in through the back gets routed through those holding rooms before being sent up to the proper chambers. Room 3B sat at the end of a narrow hallway, past the boiler room and the evidence cage. There's a dent in the floor right outside the door from where a maintenance cart tipped over, and nobody ever bothered fixing it. The air in that stretch of hallway always smelled faintly like bleach and copper, metallic like blood. I never said that part out loud before, but it's true. Now, that room 3B wasn't like the others. First of all, its camera system hadn't worked in years. We had one of those old dome cameras in the corner, the kind that looks like it's watching but really just reflects the overhead light. Folks used to joke it was a two-way mirror for ghosts. Even when we did our security audits, 3B always got waved off. Low traffic, they said. Never high profile enough to need monitoring. Until one damn week that changed everything. It started quiet. Couple of odd shifts, schedule changes that didn't make sense. They'd move a testimony an hour earlier or later without telling security until the last second. A few doors got new locks installed, digital instead of key. That raised my eyebrow, but I kept it to myself. Around that time, I noticed 3B had been marked as live. That's security system talk for an active feed. I didn't get no memo about a repair, so I asked Terry, the tech guy, if he fixed it. He looked at me confused, said he didn't even know it was broken. So someone reactivated it, but didn't log it, which, in our world, ain't just odd. It's deliberate. I started checking the schedule for who was assigned to that room. Most of the time, it just sat empty. But 3 days before the big testimony, the one that had everyone whispering in the halls, room 3B got real busy. The first thing I noticed was him, Diddy. He got brought in real quiet, no cuffs, no escort unit like they usually assign for someone in his position. Just 2 handlers in dark suits, not even uniforms. They moved like feds, but not our usual guys. I was at the bottom of the stairwell when I saw him guiding him through. He was calm, almost too calm, like he already knew the layout better than we did. One of the handlers, a taller guy with a buzz cut, tapped my shoulder and told me, casual as anything, "Why don't you grab a smoke, man? We got it from here. Now, I've been told to step aside before. Sometimes they move sensitive witnesses, or there's an internal issue that don't concern security. But something about the way he said it, and the way Diddy looked over his shoulder and gave me a quick nod like we were both in on something. I don't know. It just ain't sat right since. I went up the stairs, out to the back loading dock. Lit a cigarette I didn't even want. Just stood there staring at the dumpster like it had answers. 10 minutes, maybe 12. I stayed gone. When I came back in, the hallway felt different. Not colder exactly, but heavier. 2 of the witnesses who were scheduled to testify that afternoon, gone, not to the courtroom. Gone. One of the clerks said they'd requested reassignment. Another was sent into a separate room and refused to speak. I saw one woman, I can't name her, don't ask, shaking like a leaf in the hallway, mumbling something about his eyes and he knows. When I tried to talk to her, she wouldn't even look at me, just kept whispering, "The camera, the damn camera." By the end of the week, 3 witnesses had pulled out or demanded to be moved into federal protection. 2 more asked for anonymity and refused to appear in person. We had a full rearrangement of the testimony order, and all anyone upstairs would say was security precaution. Now, this next part, I didn't tell nobody. Not back then. But a couple weeks later, I was doing a sweep of the server logs, making sure nothing got tampered with. That's when I found it. A duplicated folder, buried under misnamed video logs, right below an old January audit. It was labeled Hold 3B_temp. I opened it. It was footage, no sound, just a shaky black and white angle from the dome corner of the room. You could see the edge of the metal table, the bolted chair, the dull walls behind. And him. Diddy. He was standing, not seated, hands loose at his sides. He didn't pace, didn't fidget, he just stared straight into the lens for a solid 3 minutes. Then, his lips started moving, slow, deliberate, saying something to the camera like it was a person. Then he tilted his head, made a motion like he was drawing a line across his neck, and walked out of frame. The file ended there. It had a timestamp for the exact time I was outside, smoking that cigarette. I watched it twice, then a third time. I couldn't sleep that night, or the night after. It wasn't just what he did, it was the knowing, like he knew someone would watch it later, and he wanted them to. After that, I asked Terry if he'd seen any camera access requests for room 3B. He told me that feed had been purged the day after the folder was made. Which means, what I found, it wasn't supposed to exist. I backed it up, kept it hidden. Maybe someday I'll hand it over to someone who can make sense of it. Or maybe it's safer if no one ever sees it again. All I know is, they say the trial was about justice, but justice never came through that basement, not through holding room 3B. Their silence goes to rot. And I'll never forget that look in his eyes when he stared into the camera, not like a man caught, but like a man recording instructions. I didn't see what happened in that room, not with my own eyes, but I saw the footage. And I ain't slept the same since. Mariner marked for silence. You don't get into my line of work expecting it to be easy. People think being a court-assigned psychologist is like doing therapy in a quiet room with soothing music, helping fragile people gather their courage. It isn't. Most days it's damage control. You deal with witnesses who haven't slept in weeks, victims reliving their worst moments, and sometimes people who aren't sure if speaking up will cost them more than staying silent. I don't usually talk about what happened during that trial, the sealed one, the one they don't include in continuing education seminars or official court history, but I still have my old notes, not all of them, but enough. And every now and then, when I can't sleep, I take them out and flip through the pages I wasn't supposed to keep. Pages I printed on the old machine, the one no one used anymore, the ones I tucked into the back of a textbook about trauma bonding, between chapters that no intern would bother reading. I remember the first red flag clearly. It was day 6 of pre-testimony evaluations. I was scheduled to see 3 witnesses back to back. Nothing unusual at first. A mix of victims and peripheral figures. People tied to the parties, the bookings, the operations that were allegedly run under that man's name. All of them had agreed to testify under partial anonymity. The first one. She was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. A former dancer, I think. She came in, with her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were nearly white, sat down across from me, and didn't speak for a full minute. When she finally did, it wasn't what I expected. He said the camera wasn't recording, she whispered, but he looked into it anyway. I asked her who she meant. She didn't answer, just stared at the wall behind me. I tried redirecting, asked her if she felt safe, if she'd been contacted or followed. She only repeated the sentence, slower this time, like it meant something deeper than what it said on the surface. He said the camera wasn't recording, but he looked into it anyway. The second witness was a young man, early 20s, neatly dressed, quiet and trembling. On paper, he was described as a paid associate. That's how they phrased it. He didn't correct it. I think it helped him feel less exposed. He sat down and kept fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. I noticed his breathing wasn't steady, shallow and fast, like he'd been running. I offered him water. He didn't take it. When I began my standard questions, he nodded mechanically, until I asked if anything had happened during intake that made him uncomfortable. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled napkin. Written on it in smeared blue ink was a name. I recognized it. It wasn't his. It was his father's. A sealed identity, supposedly redacted from all trial documentation. Said it out loud, the young man told me, his voice shaking. He said, "Tell your father he raised a soft boy." That was when the panic hit. His hands began to shake. He struggled to breathe. I had to guide him through a grounding exercise, counting objects, feeling textures, just to keep him in the room. When I asked him where this interaction occurred, he didn't say. Just looked at me with wide eyes and muttered, same place. The room with no clocks. That night, I stayed late. I pulled up the court maintenance records. Not something I'm normally supposed to access, but I'd built a few back doors over the years. Witness care isn't taken as seriously as it should be, and sometimes you have to bend rules to keep people safe. I searched for holding room 3B. It had a long log of being inactive. Surveillance disabled, unit offline had been its status for years. But 6 days before my evaluations began, someone had manually flipped the status to live recording enabled. No technician name, no ticket ID, just a manual change. That might not mean much to most people, but in our building, that's like finding a footprint where no one's supposed to walk. It wasn't a mistake. Someone turned it on. Someone who didn't want anyone to know. I submitted a preliminary alert to the internal risk board, flagging the witness statements and the camera logs. The response came the next morning. One line, stand down for procedural clarity. I'd been in the system long enough to know what that meant. Someone bigger than me had read the same information and decided not to let it grow legs. I couldn't shake the feeling that these witnesses weren't just scared of testifying. They were scared of him. Not because of what he might do later, but because of what he'd already done in a space that wasn't supposed to record anything at all. The third witness was the hardest. She didn't sit, didn't even want to enter the room. She stood in the doorway of my office, arms crossed over her chest, rocking slightly. When I asked her to come in, she whispered, "No, he was in a room like this." She wouldn't say his name, only called him that man. I asked what she meant. She said, "He smiled like he owned the silence." That phrase chilled me, not because of its poetry, but because it wasn't poetic to her. It was how she saw him. Like silence wasn't an absence to him, but a possession. Something he could bend, control. She told me she'd changed her testimony, said she'd ask the prosecutor to downgrade her statements to non-critical. I knew what that meant. She was withdrawing, and I knew why. Later that evening, when the building was mostly empty, I walked back down to the archive room and checked the schedule again. Room 3B had hosted 5 individuals in a span of 6 hours the previous Thursday. 3 of them were scheduled witnesses. 2 of them were listed as redacted, council access, private entry. No names. No logs of arrival or departure. That's when I knew for sure someone was using that room to do more than house people. They were planting fear, making sure the stories that came out on the record were diluted, trimmed. I printed copies of my notes that night, only the ones about the 3 witnesses. I used the old HP printer near the vending machines, the one that doesn't log job history. I tucked the pages into a heavy book on forensic trauma assessments. The spine was cracked, and the last intern who tried to open it said it smelled like mildew. No one ever touched it again after that. I still remember the feel of the paper. It was thick, warm from the printer. Real in a way that digital files never are. I folded them carefully and slid them inside, not because I was brave, but because I was scared. Not just for them, but for me. Every court system has blind spots, spaces in the margins where power lingers without oversight. But Room 3B wasn't a blind spot. It was a designed void, a place made for forgetting, and someone, he, had found a way to use it. He didn't need to threaten them in public. He didn't need to leave bruises. He just needed them to believe he still knew things he shouldn't. That he still saw things he wasn't supposed to. And when he looked into that camera, even if it wasn't supposed to be working, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. He was claiming the silence, like it belonged to him. And some part of me believes it still does. Chapter 3. No counsel present. They told me it was just a mix-up. Internal miscommunication, they said. Happens all the time, apparently. Only, in my 15 years of courthouse assignments, state, federal, emergency transfer facilities, I've never once seen a lockdown initiated without at least 3 chain-of-command signatures. And that night, there wasn't a single name on the form, just a digital timestamp and a lot of blank lines where the approvals were supposed to go. I was stationed on the exterior perimeter of the south entrance. My shift started at 9 p.m. By 10:12, the building was on partial lockdown. All public doors secured. 1 vehicle access point cleared. I asked dispatch for clarification. They said it was a scheduled late-night intake run. That's the term we use when a high-profile inmate is transferred under seal, usually to avoid press or internal leaks. But this wasn't on the calendar, and no transport logs were pinged through our system. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but I know what it looks like when something's being kept off the books. The courthouse was quiet that night, too quiet. No late clerks milling around, no janitorial staff. Even the 3rd-floor security booth was dark when I passed it. Around 11:03, I started my internal rounds. Hall A was clear. Halls B and C were sealed. But Hall D, that's where I saw them. 2 men in dark suits, not uniforms, no insignia, no radios. One had a file tucked under his arm, the other carried a key fob I'd never seen before. Between them was Diddy. No cuffs, no chains, no guard escort, just walking, relaxed, like he owned the damn place. I didn't say anything at first. I figured maybe it was above my clearance. But my body cam was running standard for interior movement. I watched them approach the west stairwell, the one that leads down to the old storage corridor and holding rooms. That stairwell's supposed to be sealed during lockdown, yet they walked through it like it belonged to them. I radioed Central, no response. I took a few steps closer, enough to catch the taller one's eye. He paused, turned to me, and said, casual as anything, "You're off this wing tonight. Go finish your sweep around the vehicle bay." I asked him if there was a change in protocol. He smiled and said, "Just timing rehearsals. That's all this is." Timing rehearsals? That phrase bothered me. We don't do rehearsals. This isn't theater. It's a federal building. Every second is logged. Every movement recorded. That is, unless you've got access to override the systems. I finished my sweep because I didn't want trouble, but as soon as I got back to my terminal, I flagged the stairwell feed. Camera 19W, pulled up the past 20 minutes, black screen. Signal error, restart required. I checked the camera outside room 3B, same thing. 43 minutes of silence. At this point, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly, but from that deep, crawling sense that you're standing in a room that just shifted slightly under your feet. I pulled up the access logs. 10:58 p.m., door 3B, manual override. No keycard trace, just a single entry. Access, granted handler level. Handler? It's not even a term we use in the federal courthouse system. I was still staring at the screen when Daryl, one of the senior marshals, walked in. He looked at my terminal, then at me. "You don't need to be looking at that," he said, calm but firm. "It's all above board." I asked him flat out, why was Diddy moved without legal counsel present? Why was he brought into a sealed room already used by 3 witnesses earlier today? Daryl didn't blink, just said, "Some people get more preparation. That's all." More preparation. That's what they're calling it now. I wanted to press further, but something in his tone warned me not to. So I did what we're trained to do. I documented. I compiled the body cam footage, copied the access logs, flagged the camera outages, wrote a formal incident report detailing the breach. I submitted it before sunrise. By noon the next day, my schedule had been updated. Effective immediately, I was reassigned to a courthouse in New Mexico. No explanation, no option to appeal. I was told it was temporary. It's been 11 months. They moved me out of that building like I was a liability, like I'd seen something I shouldn't have, and they didn't want to risk me talking to the wrong person. The thing is, I didn't even know what I saw at the time. Not really, just pieces, a hallway, a figure, a phrase. No counsel present. That's not a procedural error. That's a warning. Because if someone like him can be pulled into a sealed room, escorted by nameless men outside of protocol, with cameras mysteriously glitching and logs overridden, then the trial was never about justice. Not truly. It was about control. Control of what got seen, and who was allowed to remember it. Now I carry a copy of that body cam file with me. Not because I want to use it, but because I want to know I'm not crazy. That what I saw happened. That it left a mark. And sometimes, late at night, I play it back. I watch him walk past me again. No cuffs, no chains. And that same look on his face, like none of this would ever touch him. Like he already knew the ending. Chapter 4, The Drive That Shouldn't Exist. I wasn't even supposed to be working that week. They called me in because the main evidence systems manager had called out sick, and the backlog of video intake was starting to stack up. Nothing urgent, they said, just basic indexing, date tagging, secure archiving. I'd done it before, 2 summers in a row, on contract. Low pay, no recognition, no courtroom access. Just me and a monitor, buried in a cold little room they called the digital vault, which was really just a glorified closet with 2 backup servers and a second-hand chair that always leaned a little to the left. I took the shift because I needed the hours. I'd just bought a used car and couldn't afford to lose a contract gig over a no-call. Funny how ordinary that all sounds now, considering what I found that night. It started around 7 p.m. I was sorting through a batch of outdated archive cases, mostly pulled from evidence storage for legal housekeeping. When a trial like this gets to the size it did, with sealed sessions and backlogged footage, things get mislabeled all the time. Boxes come down from upstairs without proper codes. Drives end up inside the wrong envelopes. Usually I just note the mismatch and hand it off to legal review. But one envelope caught my eye. It was old, not worn exactly, but the label was yellowed, curled at the edges. It said, 3B, rejected copy. No date, no chain of custody stamp, no barcode, just that phrase, handwritten in thick black marker. I opened it. Inside was a small silver flash drive, the kind they stopped issuing years ago because of security vulnerabilities. No encryption tag, no court-issued serial number. Just a faint scratch across the casing, like it had been dropped. Now, by protocol, I should have logged it as unidentified and submitted it for destruction. But something about it, I don't know, it felt planted, or maybe forgotten on purpose. So I checked the system. No reference to a rejected copy in room 3B logs. No video metadata linked to the drive's maker model. It didn't exist. I plugged it in. What came up was a single file. No name, just a timestamp, 2025-419_22-1433. It opened into a black and white feed, grainy, borderline static. I thought it was corrupted at first, just noise. But after about 10 seconds, the image adjusted, stable, and there he was, Diddy, standing dead center in holding room 3B. Not sitting, just standing, still as a statue, facing the camera like he knew exactly where it was. There was no sound, just video. At first, he didn't move, just stared. His face was unreadable. Not angry, not scared, just steady, like he was waiting for someone to hit record. Then he began to speak. Even without audio, it was clear. His mouth moved slow, deliberate. He wasn't rambling. He was reciting. Like a list, a name, then another, then another. My chest tightened. I leaned forward, watching carefully. I don't know what possessed me to try, but I started reading his lips. Years of watching surveillance footage does weird things to your brain. You start to understand the shape of things, even when the sound's missing. One of the names he said, I knew it. It was on the protected witness list, a name I wasn't even supposed to have seen, but during metadata syncing, you come across redactions before they get fully sealed. I knew it because I remembered how carefully the team handled it. Separate chain, biometric storage, no digital record. And yet, here he was, saying it, looking directly into the lens as he did. I froze. The video kept going. A few frames later, someone else came into the shot. Just a shadow at first. The figure stepped into the frame, a woman, maybe mid-30s, unidentifiable from the angle. She paused inside the doorway. Diddy turned to her, said something, again, no audio, but the gesture was unmistakable. He pointed to the ceiling, the camera. Then he walked past her, slow and smooth, and disappeared off frame. I sat there a full minute before breathing again. I pulled the file onto a secondary partition, isolated it, encrypted it twice, I ran it through file history extraction just to see if there was any origin data. Nothing. The drive's history was wiped clean, a dead ghost in the system. I copied the footage to a clean external and ejected the flash drive, walked it down to evidence routing, logged it under found discrepancy, and slid it into the overnight drawer. I didn't want to be caught with it in my possession, but I kept the copy. That night, I sent an encrypted file to someone I knew, a federal contact from a past case. We weren't friends, but he owed me a favor. I labeled it non-existent. Even the footage, no reply. The next morning when I came in, the envelope was gone. I checked the logs, no intake, no signature. The drawer still had the same 4 items from the day before, but not the flash drive. My login credentials were suspended at 9:06 a.m. I didn't even find out until my badge wouldn't open the door. When I called IT, they told me there'd been a temporary suspension due to anomalous activity. HR called me 2 hours later, said I'd been placed on administrative leave for unauthorized access. That's when I panicked. I pulled my backup copy from the encrypted vault, burned it to a physical disc, one of those old, writable DVDs no one uses anymore, and mailed it, no return address, to the only person I thought might understand. I wrote 2 words on the label, Witness 6. I didn't know if they were even still in the system, but I remembered the sealed log entry, a name scrubbed from the witness pool 3 days before testimony, never explained. I don't know what happened after that. I left town, took freelance tech jobs. I watch my back now, use a VPN, even for weather apps, keep a second phone battery wrapped in foil. Paranoia? Maybe. But I saw something I wasn't meant to. Not just a video. I'm performing. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? He knew the camera had been turned back on. He wanted it. He looked into the lens and spoke names he wasn't supposed to know. Told someone, silently, what he was capable of. And he did it in a room designed to be unmonitored. The same room witnesses walked into and came out of changed. People think power is loud, but sometimes, power is just a man standing still in a quiet room and knowing someone's going to watch. Eventually, Chapter 5, Frozen Bench. There are moments in this line of work. Brief, quiet moments where you realize no one trained you for what's coming next. I've been on the bench nearly 2 decades, oversaw organized crime, corporate embezzlement, even a few terrorism-adjacent cases. I've had men scream at me, sob in front of me, beg for leniency in ways that still echo down the hallways of memory. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment I pressed play on that footage. It was early morning, still dark outside. The courthouse wasn't technically open, but I was already in chambers, coat draped on the back of my chair, coffee half warm and untouched. There'd been a late-night filing, a sealed motion submitted by one of the federal monitors, someone from Internal Witness Protection Oversight. They flagged it for immediate review by the bench, citing a procedural breach. That usually means something like mishandled transfer logs or a broken chain of custody. Instead, it was a flash drive. The clerk handed it to me with gloves, labeled nothing more than 3B. Confirmed clip, lip read verified. I shut the blinds, locked the door, sat down and plugged it into the standalone review laptop, one with no wireless connectivity, the kind we keep in a Faraday drawer and only bring out when the walls need to be tighter than usual. The footage loaded slow, like it didn't want to be watched. At first, all I saw was static. Then the grayscale of a ceiling light came into focus. A few seconds later, Diddy entered the frame. He wasn't handcuffed, wasn't restrained, just standing casually in holding room 3B like it was an old dressing room he'd walked into 100 times before. No sound, no timestamp, just raw visual. He looked to his right, off frame, raised a hand slightly, a gesture, not exactly a wave, not a signal, more like acknowledgement. As if someone was there, someone we couldn't see. He spoke, slowly, calmly. His lips moved like a man telling a bedtime story. The subtitles provided by the lip-reading consultant were baked into the bottom of the screen, name after name. A few of them I didn't recognize. One I absolutely did. A redacted witness I had personally sworn in under closed protective protocol. Their identity was supposed to be known only to 3 people in the system. I was one of them. Hated. He shouldn't have known. He shouldn't have said it with that look on his face. No malice, just certainty. Then came the final frame. It was almost artistic. Composed, Diddy turned directly toward the camera, leaned forward a fraction, and mouthed one last phrase. "They still owe me." I paused the footage there, leaned back, and felt, for the first time in my career, the cold weight of something I didn't want to understand pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just that the footage existed. It was that it had been filmed in a room meant for silence, in a building meant for order, within a process meant for truth. And it had been filmed with purpose. Later that morning, under strict seal, I convened a closed integrity session, what we call an internal evidentiary review that is neither transcripted nor observed. Present, the defense, prosecution, one federal overseer, one marshal, and a single witness who had been scheduled to testify that afternoon. We dimmed the lights, played the clip. No one spoke during it. But after the final frame, after the words "they still owe me" hung in the stale courtroom air, the witness vomited into their lap. One of the clerks began to cry. Not sob, just a low, stunned sort of weeping, like the kind you hear in hospital waiting rooms. The prosecutor nearest to the screen stood up, whispered to their colleague, and walked out of the room. Later, they filed for protective reassignment, citing psychological incompatibility with continued proceedings. Motion was immediately filed to delay all testimonies involving individuals named in the footage. There was no objection, no argument, only silence. I signed the order. Then I signed another, one no one will ever see. Trial day 22, all materials under review to be reclassified, transcript locked, proceeding noted as closed, integrity session, bench only. That means no record, no archive, no leaks. The court does not acknowledge what was seen or said. The bench becomes the end of the road. That evening, I returned to chambers. I sat in the same chair, drank the same now cold coffee, tried to write my notes, but the pen felt too heavy in my hand. There was a knock on my door, but when I opened it, no one was there. Just a plain envelope sitting on the floor. No name, no postage. Inside was a single Polaroid, a photograph of holding room 3B, old at least 2 decades. I could tell by the furniture, the grain of the photo paper. There was no one in the frame. Just the room, bare walls, steel table, and on the back wall, just faintly, almost smudged into the plaster, was a symbol. Circular, broken lines around a central shape, like an eye or a lock. I'd seen it before, on the wall behind Diddy in the footage. Same position, same shape. I don't know what it means, but I know it was already there. Before the room was reactivated, before the footage, before the names were spoken. I've sat on this bench for a long time. Long enough to know when a case is about more than crime, when it slips into something else, something not quite explainable, a current running beneath the floorboards of procedure and law. Whatever this is, it didn't start with a trial, and I have a terrible feeling it didn't end with that video. There are things the system is not equipped to hold, truths that don't fit neatly in case folders or legal definitions. This is one of them, and from where I sit, I wonder, how many more rooms like 3B exist? How many more names are waiting to be spoken? Chapter 6, Witness 6. I told them I wouldn't say my name. Not in that room. Not in front of anyone. Even with the record sealed. They asked if I wanted to use initials or a pseudonym. I told them no. If this was going to mean anything, if it was going to stick, I needed to say it without hiding, but also without becoming another file folder for them to tuck away. A voice, not a label. So they called me Witness 6. They brought me into the chamber through the service hallway. No main elevator, no windowed stairwell. I could tell it was early, still dark outside. Everyone in the courtroom looked like they hadn't slept. Maybe they hadn't. One of the prosecutors had a tremor in his hand that wouldn't stop. I remember watching it flicker against the edge of his notes, a small spasm, like a trapped fly. There were no cameras, I made sure of that. No phones, no live transcription, no AI transcribers, nothing. The clerk typed manually on an old mechanical keyboard that sounded like it was dying. Each letter punched out slowly, like the record was resisting itself. I didn't sit. I stood in front of the bench and told them I had worked for him. For Diddy. For over 4 years. Not directly, not in the spotlight, but close enough to see how the rooms worked. The invitations, the rules, the people who entered and left with different names, different memories, sometimes none at all. I was one of the assistants. They called us floaters. We handled the transitions, the in-betweens. You needed a ride arranged at 3 a.m.? We called it. You needed a flight under someone else's name? We booked it. You needed a guest ushered quietly out the back without talking to the press? We opened the door. But we also handled the tech. The drives, the recordings. There were cameras everywhere. That was the part no one talks about. Every party, every room, even the private ones, especially the private ones, had hidden lens points. Sometimes for security, but more often it was for leverage. He never said it outright, but you could feel it in how he moved. He didn't just want control in the moment. He wanted a memory that belonged to him. A memory he could use later. Probably I remember the night it shifted for me. It was a mansion party in Atlanta. One of the quiet ones. No flyers, no performers. Just private invitations, heavy envelopes with wax seals. Guests who never gave last names. I was on sound monitoring, making sure none of the mics overloaded, none of the footage got corrupted. That night, he rehearsed something in the lounge before the guests arrived. There were only 4 of us in the room. He was pacing, holding a glass, smiling in that way he does, where it doesn't reach his eyes. He was talking to himself out loud, rehearsing how he would speak to someone who was acting nervous. He said, "You look 'em in the eye, calm, like you're reminding them, not threatening. Reminding, you say, you're not the only one who remembers, but I'm the only one who decides how." I didn't get it at the time, thought it was part of a speech, or maybe some weird artist nonsense like prepping for a video shoot. But years later, when I watched the footage from room 3B and saw his lips say something I now know was that exact line, I understood. That wasn't performance. That was protocol. I saw that footage before anyone else, before it became evidence, before they stripped it down and censored it. I was the one who pulled it out of the backup cache. It had been misfiled. Or maybe someone meant to hide it and just didn't do a good job. It was raw, uncut. There was more to it than what's in the official file now. There was another moment, after he spoke the names. After he pointed to the camera. There was a still frame. One of those barely visible flashes before the end of the clip. It showed a list on the table, handwritten, 3 names. The third was a child's name. Not a nickname, not a code, a full legal name. And I recognized it. It was the daughter of someone who'd been trying to testify, someone who'd backed out 2 days before, said she felt sick, that she couldn't go through with it. Now I knew why. I printed that frame, pulled the metadata, saw that the footage had been edited twice after its original timestamp. Twice. So I burned the original, just once, no backup, labeled it, mailed it, made it disappear from my system. I knew they'd come looking. And they did. A week later, my contract was suspended. My apartment was visited. No one took anything, but I could feel the disturbance. A lamp moved, a drawer left slightly ajar, a password reset without my doing. So I ran. Not far, just far enough to avoid routine systems. I used prepaids, burner email, library routers. I erased myself in the quietest way I could. But I kept the original Polaroid, the list, and the frame. They tried to make it about the trial, about legal definitions, witness integrity, courtroom decorum. But none of that is what he wanted. He didn't care about prison. He cared about memory. He threatened them, yes, but it wasn't about punishment. It was about erosion. He wanted them to forget, to question their own timeline, to lose the sequence of what had happened until it turned soft and shapeless in their minds. He weaponized forgetting. That's what scared me the most. Not the footage, not the names, but the method. That calm look into the camera, the way he said things slowly, like they were instructions to someone watching decades later. Like he wasn't trying to avoid the trial. He was trying to survive the retailing. And I won't let him. Because the list is real. Because the footage is real. Because once he looked at a room full of people and said, they still owe me. What I don't. I owe the truth. And even if they erase me next, even if they bury this whole thing under 30 more layers of legal mud and procedural seals, I'll know I said it out loud. That I remembered. And I didn't look away, not for the jury. I've always said the court runs on 2 systems, the one everyone sees and the one that keeps it all standing. The archive room is part of the second kind, the part with the steel doors and the flickering fluorescence, where evidence goes not to be seen, but to be stored, coded, cross-referenced, and forgotten. I'm the evidentiary archivist, not glamorous. Most of the lawyers don't even know my name. Judges remember me only when something goes missing. But everything, every frame, every clip, every breath caught on surveillance from this building passes through my hands. I don't shape justice, I just stack its artifacts. So when Exhibit 3BA came in, I did what I always do, opened the intake sleeve, cross-referenced the evidence code, only there wasn't one. No docket entry, no barcode, no digital trail. The file came in from Chambers directly, no courier, just a hard drive slipped into a sealed black envelope with the words, dated and calmed during the rehab. No initials, no court seal, just that one instruction, printed in sharp, perfect font. I didn't ask questions. Not then. We get classified entries all the time. Wire intercepts, national security insertions, closed-door sidebars, but even those have timestamps and metadata. This one didn't. I filed it in the back room, behind a triple-locked compartment only accessed with a rotating 6-digit cipher. We keep maybe a dozen items back there, most of them so old they're nearly dust. This drive was different. I could feel it in the way it clicked when I placed it in the drawer. Like it didn't want to be filed, like it wanted to stay moving. Weeks passed. No one asked about it. The trial moved on. Headlines spun, testimonies crumbled or vanished. The jurors came and went like ghosts, but not a single entry referenced 3BA. Finally, I asked one of the case assistants why it wasn't on the public docket. Just offhand, pretending I was reconciling overflow indexes. She didn't look up from her clipboard, just muttered, "Jury doesn't need to see it, only the system does." I've heard some cold things in my life, but that was ice. I waited until late 2 a.m., pulled the drive out of the drawer and brought it to the non-networked review station. No cameras in that corner, no logs. The file was password locked, but not encrypted. A weird oversight for something so heavily sealed. The password was simple: reflection. When the video opened, I already knew what I was going to see. I'd heard the whispers, but nothing prepares you for watching someone look into a lens with that kind of ease. Diddy stood alone in holding room 3B, silent, relaxed, not performing, just speaking, calm, like someone reciting a poem for the 100th time. But this version had subtitles. Someone had run it through a lip-reading expert. Precise text appeared at the bottom of the screen, each phrase timestamped. "Do you think she'll still testify if I mention her son's school? I know where she sleeps, same sheets every night, new building, same view. You don't need to be afraid. You need to be patient. I still have favors to call in. There's a difference between regret and consequences. I offer the former." He was worse than I expected. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. He was making offers, implied payments, reminders of what he knew. Then, in the final moments, the subtitle flashed the line I'd heard rumored but never confirmed. "They still owe me." After the video ended, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the screen like it might shift again, like he might say something else. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go home. I debated leaking it. Briefly, I even typed the email draft, attached the file, wrote a message that began with, "This was never meant to be buried." But I didn't send it, because I knew what would happen. The drive would disappear, my access would be revoked. They'd send me to some courthouse in the middle of nowhere, reassign me to shelving paper files for traffic court. So, instead, I coded it, took the footage, compressed it, and embedded it into a training simulation file in our internal evidence review system. Labeled it, in respect, successfully, guided by E. It's not visible unless you dig, not searchable unless you know the structure, but it's there, waiting. Because someone else, one day, will be sitting in this chair, sorting through outdated training protocols, clicking through files late at night. And they'll see it. They'll see what the jury never did, that this wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about message. It was about memory. As I walked out of the archive room that morning, I passed the staging area where they prepped the courtroom for demonstrations. Just mock exhibits, sample chair arrangements, a sort of rehearsal for courtroom theater. One of the chairs had a placard on it. Reserved. The one who watched. I don't know who placed it there. I don't know if it was a joke or a warning or a tribute. But I remember standing there, staring at that empty chair and feeling like it belonged to me, or to someone like me, someone who saw, someone who didn't speak, but didn't forget. Chapter 8. The room is still there. There was no headline, no ruling shouted into news cameras, or verdict read before a crowded courtroom. Just a kind of stillness that settled over the building like dust, the kind you notice only when the echoes stop. One day the court was full, marshals at the doors, witnesses escorted through sealed hallways, attorneys clutching manila folders with shaking hands. The next day, it was quiet. The trial didn't end, it just stopped. No one said the word mistrial. No one said dismissed. There was no jury summoned for final deliberation. no transcript released to the press. Inside the sealed records, the final entry simply read, "Adjourned indefinitely. Review status, pending." Pending. Like the truth itself was still waiting in line. Within 2 weeks, the judge was gone, early resignation, health reasons, no farewell email. His bench sat empty for days before they finally covered it with a black cloth. One of the lead prosecutors filed for an indefinite sabbatical, then quietly disappeared from the state bar registry. No forwarding address, just a gap where a name used to be. As for Diddy, 37,442, he was transferred to the SHU permanently. Special housing unit, no contact, no visitors, not even legal counsel for weeks at a time. They said it was mental evaluation, long-term isolation, for safety. No one clarified whose safety they meant. In the deeper systems, far below the public-facing records, the courthouse maintenance logs were quietly updated. Not the kind of update most people notice. You'd have to be looking for it. Old interim 3B. Status changed from temporary use, legal transit, to inactive, utility only. No one entered a request, no one signed off, but the update stayed, and from that day forward, 3B stopped being a holding room. Least. Officially. The footage. It never made the public archive. Never crossed into exhibit status. Not even a redacted version. The flash drives were listed as corrupted. The training simulation was overwritten. The last known backup was labeled reflection_archive, but when pulled up, the file was empty. Just a static timestamp and a flashing cursor that never moved. Most people forgot, or were told to forget. The system adjusted, trials resumed. New cases came through the docket, witnesses sat in different rooms, under different names. Nothing about the building changed, except it did, because the room was still there. Same hallway, same chipped tile outside the door, same old flickering light overhead that buzzed when it rained. The wall still remembered. Weeks later, a new intern was hired. Barely 20, fresh from undergrad, nervous in that eager, directionless way. It was his third day. He'd been assigned to deliver a stack of physical files to the deep archive, something about reconciliation backlog, whatever that meant. He didn't know the building yet. Took a wrong turn somewhere after the freight elevator. Ended up in the basement hallway where the walls narrowed and the air turned still. The paper folders weighed heavy in his arms. He counted door numbers, 3A, 3B, and stopped. The door was slightly open, just an inch, enough to show darkness inside, but not enough to reveal what waited beyond. He leaned closer. The room was silent. Dust motes floated through the single shaft of light from the hallway. He stepped forward, just a toe across the threshold, 1 foot in 2 worlds, and then he saw it. On the far wall, sketched into the plaster, not written, not painted, but carved, deep and deliberate. Daily work witnesses, they were mirrors. The letters weren't neat. They looked like they'd been scratched by something dull. Metal, maybe, or fingernails. He stood, frozen, the files slipping in his arms, the hallway suddenly colder than it should have been. Behind him, the light flickered once, and in the corner of the room, just beyond his sight line, the faintest red LED blinked once, and then went dark. Somewhere the system moved on, but the room remained, because memory doesn't need a verdict, only a place to wait.